I always thought that China was simply a huge factory, a country of the third world with high pollution and people who do not believe in God and even bully some Muslim minorities. So because of the news and my ignorance, my attitude towards China was really negative until I actually arrived here. And when I first arrived here, I was really amazed because everything was automated, robots were everywhere, and anything you do was very convenient. But the most important thing was that people were very nice and very hospitable and very cute and polite. So I actually decided to stay here. Until 2022, I experienced only the positive stuff. But in 2022, because Omicron came to China, the government undertook very strict measures. We were not allowed to go out our houses for 3 freaking months. And of course, at that time, I started re-evaluating whether I should stay here or whether I should leave. So in this video, I'm gonna talk about the pros and cons of living here in China and decide finally whether I should go or whether I should stay. And first, I'm gonna talk about quite a controversial topic, which is safety. You probably already know that in every corner in China, there is a CCTV camera, and some people might be thinking, oh, I do not like it. You know, the government is tracking your every step. As for me, I think it is great because like if anyone steals or does some illegal action, this action will be always recorded on camera. And you know, when I first came to China, I could walk like literally at 4 a.m. in the morning and I would feel completely safe. Whereas I remember once I walked out at like 11 p.m. in California and there were a lot of addicts around me. You know, I felt super unsafe because I was like, okay, at any moment there's gonna be a person pointing a gun at me. So when I came to China and, you know, like comparing these two aspects, I think this safety aspect is much better in China than in the States or even in Europe. So basically, in all the years living here in China, nobody has ever stolen from me or anything like this. And I felt completely safe here until one day, specifically one night. Basically, what happened was I was walking out of a nightclub and I was already going home. And a guy followed me. I was going towards a taxi and he grabbed my phone and he told me,
"You're staying here and then you're going home with me."
Yeah, then he basically continued threatening me. He continued shouting at me. He was calling me a whore, a bitch, and for no reason. Like, I was really shocked. I was more shocked about the fact that we were in a crowd. And you know what people did? They were simply watching us. They were simply watching this guy threatening me as if it was a theater play. Nobody would interfere in that. You know, if that same thing happened in my home country, I believe there would be at least one person, a man or a woman. They would definitely interfere and do something about it, call the police or anything like this. But, you know, in that situation, I felt so unsafe. And, you know, one characteristic about Chinese society is that, you know, if something happens like this, you know, if you see bullying around you, nobody will interfere actually. So there was even news recently, there were basically 4 guys beating 2 women in a restaurant, and people who were eating in the restaurant, they continued eating as if nothing is going on.
A scuffle breaks out as she and her friends try to defend themselves.
Speaking of a nightlife, except for this safety concern, is a huge advantage here in China because there are so many young people here, generally such a high density of people that you can definitely find something fun here. And I believe because there are so many people here in China and people who have money, there are different types of entertainment. You know, I cannot even think of anything that doesn't exist in China. China has everything and anything legal. illegal, okay? There are no casinos or anything like this. Casinos are located in Macau, actually. Macau is still part of China. You can go there to play a casino. Yeah, Macau is basically just an entertainment city, I believe. But yeah, in China, you can find anything. You should not worry about having fun here. You will definitely never, ever get bored. Everything works here 24/7. I mean, not everything, but you know, some entertainment places work 24/7. Those same nightclubs, usually people would go out of there at like 6 a.m., 7 a.m. and so on and so forth. It's definitely, you know, the nightlife is on another level in China, the fun, the entertainment, and it is definitely an advantage. You'll never ever get bored in this country. But just keep in mind, you have to be safe. If something happens to you, nobody will interfere, most likely. The next important aspect to consider is food. Some people would say, oh, I don't like Chinese food. And then I want to ask those people, which food you specifically don't like? You don't like Beijing food? You don't like Sichuan food? You don't like Xinjiang food? Which food specifically you don't like? I cannot even, you know, like count how many cuisines China has. Like literally so many cuisines, so many dishes. I still, until this day, I do not remember their names specifically. I cannot even name my favorite foods. There is a bunch of Chinese dishes I love, I adore. China is literally, I think, the capital of food. Here you have freaking everything and anything. You know, when I first came here to China, I even gained weight. It's really hard. It's really so hard to, you know, be skinny here. Although there is a variety of food, which is amazing, but you still have to be very cautious because the food control here is not as strict as in other countries. For example, there was recently a scandal because one brand of soy sauce which had production in China and in Japan, their ingredients were really different. So in China, basically there were 40 ingredients. Most of them, they were chemicals, whereas in Japan, the same soy sauce only required, I believe, 2 or 3 natural ingredients. Why did this happen? Well, it didn't happen because, you know, that company just favored Japanese consumers. No, it's not because of this. It's because Japan as a government has much stricter rules to their food production. They would not allow so many chemicals to be in the soy sauce, whereas in China, it's allowed. And now let me talk about the costs. In short, I have to tell you, you need on average $10,000 in order to, you know, have some decent life here in Beijing. I believe some foreigners might have a misconception that China is a cheap country. No. If you live in Beijing or Shanghai or in Shenzhen, be ready to spend some money, okay? But let's not forget that, you know, China is still a developing country, and certainly there are places that are still very poor. Of course, you can go there, but you would probably have to survive in those places because they do not speak English and they even rarely speak Mandarin. Why the cost of living is so high? Well, most of it consists of a rent. And you probably know that, you know, rent here in China is one of the most expensive on earth because people here want to have a house and the demand is very high. So for example, here in Beijing, if you want to rent a decent, more or less decent apartment for one person, it's probably going to be even a studio. It's going to cost you $2,000 or something like this. The place I am renting currently is $3,000 and I'm not satisfied with it. It's really old, but there's nothing better for this price for one person. If you want, you definitely can find an apartment for like $1,000, but most likely that apartment will have a really interesting bathroom. So they would probably have a squatting toilet or a toilet connected to your shower, and it's really a frequent phenomenon here in China. The bathroom is really weird. I don't understand why. And in general, the design for an apartment here in Beijing is really not appealing, okay? Shanghai, a bit better. Shenzhen is okay, but Beijing, No, it's really hard. It's a headache to find a good apartment here in Beijing. And then you add the price for the food. As I mentioned, if you want to eat healthy, you really have to spend some money on it. And then the third thing that you would spend a lot of money on is medicine. If you don't speak Chinese, if you don't have health insurance, and you got sick in China, welcome to hell. In China, there are different kinds of clinics. First of all, it can be whether state clinic or a private clinic. Secondly, it can be whether traditional Chinese medicine or Western clinic. First, let's talk about the state clinics and the private clinics. In the state clinic, everything is quite, normal, but, there are so many people in China, so there are actually huge lines, and sometimes in order to get a doctor's appointment, you would have to wait months in some cases. And you have to speak Chinese or take a translator with you. And then there are private hospitals. They may be very expensive. The one I go to, the appointment costs around $300, so it's quite expensive. And so once I had a really small problem, or it seemed like a small problem, and I went to quite a cheap. And so I went there and the doctor checked me and she told me, oh, you actually need a surgery. And not only this, she told me that I had a pre-cancer stage. You cannot imagine what state I was in on that day. I was like, what the heck? I was like, I was gonna die. So of course, I didn't spare my money and I went to the expensive hospital for the second opinion, and the doctor there checked me and she was like, Aina, you do not have a problem, but you do have a problem that you actually got fooled in another hospital. They simply fooled you. And the Chinese doctor who prescribed me to do the surgery, not only she did that, she also advised me to buy their Chinese traditional medicine, some plants, and yeah, I had to buy those plants on the first floor of that clinic. I did buy that. It was around $500. Yes, I was duped. Yes, I was fooled. But you know what? When people tell you that you are getting cancer, you would buy some plants at least. Oh, and yes, I forgot to mention, of course, the dentistry guys, treat your teeth in your own country, because here in China, even Chinese people go to Korea or to Thailand to treat their teeth, because in those countries, treating teeth, the dentistry in general, is way cheaper and the quality is not worse than here in China. So for example, I went to treat my teeth and one tooth, it was a little bit complicated. It was 10,000 RMB, which is around $1,500. Yes, and I treated another tooth and it was 5,000 RMB and it was without some, big complications. So yeah, it's quite expensive. And also I have aligners right now. They're not Invisalign. They are some, Chinese factories, Chinese production. It cost me $4,000, whereas I heard in the States, you also spend around $4,000 or $5,000 on Invisalign aligners. So yeah, it's quite expensive. I don't recommend that. And of course, I have to talk about the people here. In general, most of the people are really, really kind. They are always willing to help you. They're very generous. Oh my gosh, Chinese people, I feel like, are the best and they're very hospitable. But I cannot ignore one fact, that the older generation is kinda not very well mannered. And let me explain this. In some parts of China, especially if it's not the first tier city, you would see people, like spitting all around and, like talking very loud and, things like that, throwing away the garbage anywhere and everywhere. Yeah, you may see that. It means that, the manners are not quite there, but they're still kind people. Let me explain why they're not very well mannered. Actually, there was a cultural revolution starting from 67 up to 77, when basically what they were doing, they were eliminating their own culture. They were not going to school. They were not allowed to go to universities. So basically people were not receiving education, and they were basically farmers or the working people. So because the people were eliminating their own culture, I think I have the right to, say that those people became cultureless. That is why, the manners were put, behind and were not paid attention to. But the younger generation right now, of course, do not have the same habits. It's actually quite the opposite, because so many foreigners mention this aspect. So I also had to mention that yes, it does exist, but that doesn't indicate that, you know, the people lack the kindness or anything like this. No, no, no. They're actually super kind, the kindest people. But, you know, the spitting habit, I learned that, you know, they have this spitting habit because they believe that the spit has some bad energy and they have to spit it out. So yeah, you should learn more about their own cultures. Yeah, it's sometimes annoying when, you know, you are in a restaurant and some people are eating very loud, or they're watching Douyin and they're not using the headphones. It may be annoying, but it happens like in 1% of the cases. It doesn't happen 100% of the time, just 1% of the time. And yeah, you should, I think, include this aspect, but it's not something really, really big for me. You know, this is just my own experience, and my own experience is mostly positive and sometimes very, very positive about Chinese people, but some foreigners have actually a little bit of a different experience, so let me share it with you guys. So before pandemic, if you come to China, if you are a white person, as long as you're white, you can earn a lot of money here. So for example, there are some jobs in China that would require you just to be white and receive at least $3,000 per month. Sometimes you would have to stand at the reception desk and smile at people. You don't have to speak Chinese, you don't have to speak English, you just have to smile and be a white person. Or you could be hired as a model. Anyone, as long as they look European, they could work as a model. And my friend even had a joke about this. If you are a model in Europe, you are 1 in a million. But if you are a model in China, you're just 1. On top of this, Chinese people would treat you as if you are something like a godlike. They would take pictures with you. You would be like very exotic. They would think of you as something like an exotic thing. And basically, they would think of themselves as this, Chinese people, yes, and your status, if you are a white person, would be something like this. I'm not exaggerating this. Chinese people would treat you just as if you are a little bit above, okay? And I don't think there is something wrong in it. I think being a little bit more hospitable there's nothing wrong in it generally. But what was happening during the pandemic, the things were changing, and the change was even visible. And during the pandemic, for the first time in my life, I have heard of such a thing as a white trash.
You done spilled that on my titties, Steve!
They're white trash.
What is a white trash? A white trash is usually a white male. Okay, white males are, you know, targeted everywhere. So basically, a white person who came to China, who was a loser in their home country and became, you know, kind of successful in China. If you're a foreigner, if you're walking in the street of, you know, some small city, people would be looking at you, staring at you, and even sometimes taking pictures. And some foreigners develop this celebrity syndrome. They think they are so handsome or so beautiful. That's why people take pictures of them. Let me tell you, no, it's not. No, it's not. They just think you of some exotic animal, nothing else. Let me tell you my story. Actually, since I arrived here to China, no Chinese person would think I was a foreigner. So I did not experience any cultural shock regarding this when, you know, people would be taking picture of me or anything. There happened a few times just when I first arrived. Yes, that people would take pictures of me, and I was like, why are you taking pictures of me? Or why are you taking pictures with me? They would be like, oh, it's because your skin is so white, or it's because I have a cute face, but not because I was a foreigner. They were like, oh, you're a foreigner? And sometimes I would explain to Chinese people, I'm a foreigner, I'm from Russia. And then they would be like, no, you're not, you're Chinese. And I was like, okay. All right, fine. And once I dyed my hair into blonde, and I really looked kind of more foreign, and people even started speaking English with me instead of Chinese, and I literally felt another attitude towards me. I felt like I was in a zoo and people were watching at me as if I'm some sort of animals. So I felt like I did not belong to the place, and I really wanted to dye my hair back so that I do not have that feeling that I am an alien in this country. And I think looking like an alien or feeling yourself like an alien in another country is actually okay if you're just traveling here, if you're here for a short time. But if you decide to stay here and you still feel like an alien, I do not think it is a good thing. What I realized at that time when my hair was blonde, I realized that, you know, in order to live in a country for a long time, you have to, first of all, accept their culture, you have to follow their traditions, you have to respect the people around you, you have to speak their language, and number 5, you have to look like them. You have to look like them so that you do not feel yourself like you do not belong to that place. So I think the look is quite important here. So far, I was talking about the attitude towards the white people and towards me. Let me a little bit talk about the attitude towards black people. Maybe you won't be very surprised if I tell you that some Chinese are really, really racist, and I'm sorry that I have to talk about this aspect, but I have to talk about this aspect. It is really true. Basically, there are so many stereotypes, so many wrong and bad stereotypes about black people in China, and they specifically spread from Guangzhou, you know, the southern part of China, because in Guangzhou there is a huge black community, and there are some rumors that, you know, those people, the black people, would spread HIV, and they sleep with the Chinese girls a lot, and that they, you know, force Chinese girls to sleep with them. I don't know, so many disgusting rumors that I heard, and I'm sorry I have to tell you about them, but I think I should. And another thing that I heard of, not just I heard of, but which is really true, is that some foreign men, I'm not mentioning just black men, but foreign men in nightclubs, you know, especially before pandemic, because I visited nightclubs a lot in Guangzhou, and some foreign men would come to you and offer you drugs. You know, in China, you can get a death penalty for this. It's crazy that, you know, it happens, but it's usually marijuana. It's nothing like really, really heavy, but still, yeah, it's a very sensitive topic, actually. I'm not sure I really should talk about it, but yeah. But at the same time, I'm not gonna tell you that, you know, if you're a black person and you come to China and you will not have a good life. No, I'm not saying this. The thing is, it is a fact that the attitude towards white people is better than the attitude towards black people. It's just a fact, and I'm sorry that I have to mention this fact to you. The next aspect, of course, is dating. Dating is very important, okay? So dating is different whether you are a man or a woman, okay? If you are a woman and if you look very European, and if you do not follow the Chinese beauty standards, which I talk about in my previous video, probably your chances to find a good guy are not very, very high. My friends are models. My friends are really, you know, like beautiful, beautiful, beautiful models. They would be considered extremely beautiful, especially in Europe or in America. But here in China, the only guys they would find are boys. And they're usually surrounded by boys because Chinese people, especially recently, think that, you know, Western girls are really, really easy, and they're very open-minded, and they think that, you know, having sex with a foreigner on the first date is something normal. So some guys, you know, meet foreign girls and they say on the first date, we can sleep together, or we can take a shower together, and you know, it's kind of hypocritical, I would say, because the attitude towards Chinese people is very, very different. Like, at the same time, Chinese people, I call them very conservative, because the way they act and the way their relationship usually progresses is usually quite slow. The process is quite slow before they, you know, commit the first kiss or anything. The period before they go into relationship is called Aina, and at that time they're not officially a boyfriend and a girlfriend, but at the same time they, you know, develop this kind of, you know, romantic relationship and so on and so forth. So it's quite kind of romantic and kind of slow and kind of cool and kind of an advantage, but you will not see the same attitude towards foreigners. I'm always shocked when I hear my foreign girlfriends complaining about Chinese guys, about how disgusting they are and, you know, how disrespectful they are towards them. And at the same time, I think because I look very Chinese and I also speak some Chinese, I have never experienced that. Even when, you know, the first time I had a date, yeah, I didn't experience that, you know, some guys were, you know, this crazy. But I cannot ignore the fact that age matters. Okay, here in China, if you are a woman and if you are old and they consider 35 plus to be old, they would call you a 剩女, which is basically a left out woman. And it's a negative term describing, yes, a woman who still is not married, who is 35 plus. But those women usually have a good career and so on and so forth, but they still didn't find a husband. You know what, here in China, people really, I think, adore younger girls. So I think that's definitely a disadvantage because we're not getting younger. Okay, we're only getting older, and I have a birthday this week, by the way. So 1 year older. Yeah. The next aspect is, of course, infrastructure. You know, before coming to China, when I was imagining this country, I would think of the color gray. But when I came here, you know, and lived here for a while, I think the color has changed and it became the color green. Why? Well, because China is really green, and the Chinese people even joke about this. They say that, you know, gardening, planting is simply in their DNA. Transportation is simply on another level. There are high-speed trains that, you know, develop the speed of 400 kilometers per hour and even higher. And in the streets, you will not see homeless people. And I think I have to mention this advantage because, you know, when I walk in Moscow, if you ever come to Moscow, you would see so many homeless people. And when I was living in California, I was always afraid of those homeless people as well. I think that the fact that there are no homeless people here in China, or at least you don't see them, is a good point, is an advantage. But certain disadvantage is pollution. You know, pollution here, but it's not as bad as I thought. Actually, if you check the air quality app, you would see that usually in the southern part of China, it is actually pretty okay. Here where I live in Beijing, sometimes, yes, the air quality is not so good, but I always check it, and if it is rarely, it's not, you know, like it doesn't happen regularly, but sometimes indeed the air quality sucks. So on those days, I usually try to stay indoors, and if I do go outside, I would wear a mask. And I think I have to mention here the VPN. Oh my gosh, VPN, it's so freaking annoying. And if you come here to China, you cannot simply just download random VPN and think it would work. No, there are actually schemes, very complicated schemes of downloading the right VPNs. You know, you have to always turn it on and then turn it off. It's really annoying, but something that I think I already got used to, but still kind of gives, you know, some discomfort in your daily life. Another important aspect to consider if you want to stay here for a long time is education for your children. Of course, in the future, I want to have a family and I want to give a birth to a child, and education is like super duper important. And you know what, here in China, I think the culture is so freaking, you know, competitive. There are two types of schools, the state school and the private schools. The state schools, the advantages is that the quality of education is pretty okay. The disadvantage is that the classes are really huge, like 40-50 people per class, and you know, teachers are really strict, and sometimes I think they can still even beat children. They shout at children, and I think, you know, like in those environments, although yes, they may learn something, yes, they may learn the academics, but they will suffer. You know, I don't want my kids to suffer. And as for the private schools, I myself worked in private schools, so the good ones are really, really expensive, and still the quality is still not so good, and you know, it's not so easy to get there still. So even Chinese people consider to give away their children. They usually send their children to Thailand or to Singapore. And you know, Chinese people, on the other hand, are really, really competitive, and they also make their children as some item for competition. You know, they would make schedules for their children, and sometimes the children would wake up at 7 a.m. and come home at 11 p.m. or if they ever come home, because sometimes teachers send their children to boarding schools. So basically on weekdays, the children spend their time in a boarding school. On top of having, you know, like all this school education, they would also go to some other extracurricular activities that their parents want them, you know, to go for. I feel sorry for the children because yes, it's a really competitive environment, and I'm not sure whether in the future I would want my own children to be educated in China or somewhere else. You know, today I think I mostly talk about some negative stuff about living in China. Generally, I love this country, but you know, love is blind, as people say. Yes, you still have to consider some of the negative aspects here, such as education and so on and so forth, before you decide living here for a long time. And by the way, you can learn more about Chinese culture by watching my previous video about Chinese beauty standards. And in the next video, I'm going to talk about dating culture. So see you in the next video. Bye bye.